Committee will come to order. Good morning. Today, the committee will examine the use of Arbitron's portable people meter, a device that Arbitron claims is revolutionizing radio audience ratings, but which instead may be eliminating diversity in radio broadcasting. The last 30 years have been a great American entrepreneurial story for minority-owned radio stations and minority radio listeners. Where once there were few or no minority radio stations in most cities, now there are multiple stations competing in all major metropolitan areas. The existence of this hard-won legacy is now threatened. Arbitron's controversial use of PPM is driving away advertisers. Minority radio has been hit by a perfect storm, the economic downturn and PPM. Most people have probably never even heard of the PPM. The PPM is a device that looks like a beeper. It is designed to detect and electronically record the radio stations a person listens to. Arbitron is using the PPM to replace the paper diaries that have been used for decades to find out who listens to which station. In 2006, Arbitron introduced the PPM in several cities, including New York and Philadelphia. The results were swift. The ratings of minority-owned or minority-targeted radio stations plummeted by as much as 70%. Since then, Arbitron has expanded the use of its PPM across the country in 31 additional markets, which has resulted in crippling minority-owned or targeted radio stations. These ratings have had a devastating effect on the radio industry. Advertising, profit, and programming choices are all shifting away from the minority communities. I have no quarrel with a rating system that is accurate, but there is serious question as to whether the way Arbitron uses PPM produces truly accurate results. I note that I am not alone in the concern. The Media Rating Council, MRC, is the industry's self-regulatory body, where the council finds that a measurement service consistently provides fair, accurate, and unbiased data. It awards accreditation. Where this is not the case, it denies accreditation. The MRC has reviewed Arbitron's use of the PPM and has certified its use in only 2 markets, Riverside, California, and Houston, Texas. The MRC has withheld accreditation to Arbitron in 31 of the 33 PPM markets. In addition, the Attorney General in New York and New Jersey, Maryland, and Florida have all taken actions against Arbitron, alleging flaws in PPM's methodology that have resulted in the undercounting of minority listeners, precipitous drops in ratings, and loss of advertising revenues. Yet Arbitron has not changed and insists on commercialization before it receives proper accreditation. Some people may ask how a problem like this could even exist in this day and age. Well, as the famous expression goes, when the cat's away, the mice will play. In this case, the cat hasn't been seen in years. For many years, our government has taken a hands-off approach to oversight or regulation of the radio rating industry. The result is that Arbitron, a monopolistic company, is not regulated by anyone. Arbitron argues that the FCC does not have jurisdiction over it, and Arbitron is free to ignore MRC, the so-called industry regulator, because MRC is a purely voluntary organization with a voluntary code of conduct and voluntary participation, and we do not have to pay any attention to them as well. Can we afford to make the health of minority radio, can we afford to make the health of minority radio broadcasting depend on voluntary good behavior on the part of a monopolistic company? This is not the first time Congress has considered this question. Back in the 1960s, the House Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee considered regulating radio and television audience rating companies. Back then, Congress opted to let the industry regulate itself, based on assurance that it would be done in a rational way. In fact, the industry created MRC to carry out that, that self-regulation. Apparently, this self-regulatory system more or less worked for a number of years. Now, I'm not sure. Perhaps we need to take another look at that basic issue. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear from Michael Skarskinski, the CEO of Arbitron, and of course, who can hopefully shed light on some of these questions. Additionally, we will hear from other members of the radio industry who have been directly affected by the PPM. I look forward to hearing their testimonies and discussing potential solutions to this problem. And at this time, I would like to yield time to the ranking member of the committee, gentleman from California, Congressman Darrell Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as this committee is well aware, as a result of our oversight of the census, we expect and will get a more accurate count, data that is more reliable. Oddly enough, new technology for the census was at the core of our hearings and our recognition that the new technology was not ready for prime time. Today's hearing, similarly, is on whether the accuracy, the total accuracy of PPM is in fact to be acknowledged, or if in fact more work is to be done. It seems clear that prior to the introduction of PPM, radio rating measurement was stuck in the words of one columnist in the Stone Age. With the use of weekly handwritten paper diaries, the issues related to the use of these diaries in fair, simple, easy-to-grasp terms was questionable. Attempting to restructure that system, if you will, to make a Franklin Day Planner of diaries had been tried many times, but ultimately it was only as good as a reporting person, and often questions about brand loyalty being more important when somebody was recapturing what they had done over a week rather than the count of how many minutes they spent on a specific station. Notwithstanding that, being one of the two members, or excuse me, my district including one of the two locations in which we have been approved, Riverside, California, I'm acutely aware that we want to not only get it right, but we want to recognize the real value in a media market of the listeners. I'm pleased today to see both the President and CEO of the rating agency and our witness, Alfred C. Liggins, Chief Executive Officer and President of Radio One, a person who, in fact, has found it to be a useful tool. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to go through my entire opening statement. I'd ask that it be placed in the record, and would just close.
Without objection.
And just close saying that although today the numbers are what we're talking about, from my own background of purchasing advertising, I can tell you that the black entertainment television, when I was advertising on cable, outperformed in the actual benefit to our company its rating, and was one of the most cost-effective places to advertise my brands. Knowing this, I recognize that even with a rating, it doesn't state what the value is to the advertiser. So in closing, Mr. Chairman, it is clear that we have to both look at accurate numbers, and over time the rating agencies must, I repeat, must modernize to look at intensity of the listener, intensity of the watcher in the case of television, and weight that. Today there is no such thing as a system that properly understands that you may have less or more listeners, they may listen for less or more time, but they may be much more loyal to the brands that are advertised on those stations. That technology does not exist. We will not hear, as far as I know, about it today. But, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that you are teeing up a matter that has been for too long not heard in the Energy and Commerce Committee, or in this committee, or even next door in Judiciary Committee, and I commend you on holding this hearing and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony and also your kind words. We will now move to our first panel. and it's a long-standing policy that we swear in all of our witnesses. So if you would stand and raise your right hand. You agree to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? If you do, answer in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that. You may be seated. Let me just run down. Mr. Michael Skarzinski is President and CEO of Arbitron. Prior to joining Arbitron, Mr. Skarzinski served as President and CEO at a number of technology companies, including, I think it's Performance Technology, and of course he's also with Zebo and Predictive Networks, and of course he focused on business and product development. Mr. Skarzinski also held management positions at Lucent and, of course, under the administration of George H. Bush. Skarzinski served as the Secretary of Trade Development at the Department of Commerce. Mr. George Ivey has been the Executive Director and CEO of the Media Rating Council since 2000. The Media Rating Council is not for profit organization which was created at the request of Congress 44 years ago to ensure high ethical and operational standards for rating companies. Mr. Ivey's background includes 25 years of experience in media research, auditing, oversight, and consulting. Prior to joining the MRC, Mr. Ivey was a partner at Ernst & Young and their lead representative and advisor to the MRC. Mr. Cyril Chagrin is the Executive Vice President of the Corporate Research Division at Univision Communications, Inc., where she oversees research for all media divisions. Mrs. Chagrin is considered an expert in the field of audience measurement and is renowned for her research on sampling methodology. Prior to joining Univision, Mrs. Chagrin was the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Development at Nielsen's Media Research. During her 27 years at Nielsen, she developed new systems of data collection. She also was the principal developer of Nielsen's Hispanic service, which she managed for 10 years. Welcome. Mr. David Honing is the co-founder and current president and executive director of the Minority Media and Telecommunication Council. He also serves as general counsel to the Broadband Opportunity Coalition. The MMTC represents over 70 minority, civil rights, and religious national organizations in selected proceedings before the FCC and other agencies. Mr. Horning has practiced communications and civil rights law since 1983, specializing in electronic redlining and race discrimination cases. Why don't we just start with you, Mr. Skarzinski, and of course give us your statement. You have 5 minutes, and the way it works here is that when you start out, the light is on green, and then just a minute before you're in, it turns to yellow, and then a minute later it turns to red. And red throughout the United States of America means stop. So, Mr. Skarzinski, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee. I am Michael Skarzinski, Chief Executive Officer of Arbitron. On behalf of Arbitron's 1,300 employees who work in 27 states, I'm proud to appear before this committee today. For more than 60 years, Arbitron has been dedicated to advancing the interests of the radio industry. We provide the quality data that allows radio broadcasters to make programming decisions and advertisers to make their media buying decisions. Today's hearing is focused on Arbitron's Portable People Meter, or PPM, and its impact on minority radio stations. We share the concern regarding the health of this important voice of the broadcasting community. We are, however, confident that PPM is not the cause of the challenges faced by minority broadcasters. It is encouraging to note that urban adult contemporary is the most listened to format in the top 16 PPM markets. This was reported just 2 days ago by an important trade publication, Inside Radio. We believe that the Inside Radio report is another strong indication that PPM continues to reflect reliably the listenership of all formats, including urban and Hispanic. Arbitron has worked to implement the PPM service responsibly and fairly, and we have always been sensitive and responsive to customer concerns raised about PPM. Arbitron launched its innovative rating service to support the entire radio industry's objective to have relevant, reliable data that enables it to compete against television, internet, and other media for advertising revenue. While PPM represents a significant advance, it cannot do everything. It cannot solve the severe economic challenges that the radio industry has confronted for the last 2 years. We have all felt the impact of a recession that has caused a drastic and in some cases devastating decline in radio advertising, with resulting significant declines in radio revenue. Further, PPM cannot address the high debt burdens faced by many radio broadcasters, including minority broadcasters. Our radio broadcast customers asked Arbitron to develop an electronic measurement service that helps them showcase the value of radio. Our advertising agency customers asked us to provide them with a service that more accurately reflects exposure to radio. We responded. The development of PPM is a reflection of our commitment to improving radio. Arbitron spent more than $100 million over 10 years developing this solution. We incorporated input from industry players, and the technology has been thoroughly tested over time. The PPM technology and methodology are solid. PPM was honored by Time magazine as one of the best inventions of 2007. PPM methodology was built on the MRC accredited diary methodology and produces valid and reliable audience estimates. In fact, PPM has been the audience measurement tool of choice for several years in a number of European countries as well as Canada and Singapore. Overall, we have received a great deal of positive customer feedback about PPM. Broadcasters are telling Arbitron that PPM provides reliable, timely, and granular data. Providing our broadcast customers the more timely PPM data has helped guide mid-course corrections and programming adjustments to advance their business. For example, California radio station KJLH, owned by Stevie Wonder, added the Steve Harvey Show on August 10, 2009. Current PPM data shows that KJLH, between September and October 2009, experienced a 60% increase in morning drive share for persons 18 to 34. When I joined Arbitron in January of this year, I made it my priority to visit customers personally. I learned from customers that there are powerful and constructive ideas about how we can improve our PPM service. In fact, listening to our customers has helped us craft our continuous improvement program as we strive to improve our PPM service and make it a valuable asset for the industry. Every technology requires improvements, and we believe we have been both proactive and responsive to making improvements. This year, we have expanded cell phone-only sampling to a national average of 15%, and we expect to increase to 20% by year-end 2010. We've instituted country of origin reporting. We've expanded extensive training, in-person coaching, and enhanced incentives to encourage greater survey participation. Additionally, we are working with our customers and other industry leaders to develop an engagement index. As envisioned, the engagement index would be a metric that complements existing data and reflects an audience's involvement and loyalty to a particular station. This cooperative work could help all broadcasters, advertising agencies, and advertisers have a balanced impact on radio ad planning and buying. We have been working tirelessly with members of the minority broadcasting community, and we believe that with your leadership and a continued dialogue, we can make progress towards a common ground. Mr. Chairman, Arbitron welcomes the opportunity to work with you and members of the committee to address the challenges of the minority radio broadcasters. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ivey?
Sure, thank you. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee, my name is
Is your
George.
mic on?
It's on.
Yeah, maybe pull it just
Put it a little closer to you, yeah.
Can you, is that better? Okay. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee, my name is George Ivey, and for the last 10 years I've served as the Executive Director and CEO of the Media Rating Council. I would like to thank Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and the committee for the opportunity to testify this morning on Arbitron's portable people meter rating service. Before joining the MRC, I worked with Ernst & Young as lead partner on all MRC audits. Including my 10 years as Executive Director, I have over 25 years' experience in auditing rating service methodologies, and I've presided over and conducted many hundreds of these audits. 45 years ago, Congress addressed the same issue this committee faces today, namely the accuracy and reliability of audience research. At that time, after extensive testimony and careful consideration, Congress reached three basic conclusions. First, there was a need for professional, independent review of audience rating services. Second, that industry self-regulation, rather than the hand of direct government regulation, was the best means of assuring quality and accuracy of audience rating data. And third, through federal laws regulating anti-competitive conduct and deceptive practices, the federal government retained the means to deal with serious consumer impacting abuses. The MRC ultimately emerged based on the suggestions received during these congressional deliberations. Just as Congress envisioned, our only business is to review and accredit audience rating services through rigorous, independent, and objective audits. One of the hallmarks of our auditing procedures is that participating research organizations must be totally transparent to us, driving our confidentiality requirements, which were originally recommended by Congress. We are independent of the rating services we review. The only funds we accept from rating services are the payments for their CPA audits, which are passed through in full to the CPA firms we engage. As described in my written testimony, the MRC has adopted stringent safeguards to assure that accreditation decisions are based only on the merits. We appreciate the committee's interest in the merits of the PPM services, and of particular importance, its concern that PPM services may fail to accurately represent the listening preferences of minority audiences. Through cooperation with the committee subpoena, we have made audits and our related correspondence available for your review. We hope our diligence, expertise, and due process is apparent from this documentation. From the standpoint of the MRC's role and mission and what we are qualified to observe, I see two distinct issues. First, whether the PPM technology itself is an improvement in terms of measurement accuracy. Second, how this technology is being implemented by Arbitron in the markets of interest. Let me quickly address the first issue. There is little doubt, and in fact there exists a broad industry consensus, that electronic measurements such as Arbitron's PPM technology can represent an improvement over existing non-electronic audience measurement when implemented diligently. In the second area, the implementation details, the MRC has ongoing concerns. Perhaps most important, in our opinion, Arbitron has failed to demonstrate that the PPM services can attain sufficient performance metrics among certain mostly younger panelists across most markets on a sustained basis. And the company continues to introduce numerous new PPM markets without having solved this issue. We have ongoing concerns and dialogue surrounding several measurement issues. Despite efforts to improve and extensive cooperation from Arbitron with the MRC, these issues remain a concern today. Attached to our written testimony, reference attachment F, is a series of key performance indicator charts that illustrate a decline in tabulation rates among young adult panelists during the period from January 2009 to September 2009. This was considered by our committee in the last audit review meeting of the PPM services. In almost all cases, young adult African American panelists show even worse performance than these general charts indicate. These charts also show response rates, referred to as SPI, for the markets, some of which are low by the committee. Arbitron is in the process of adding significant staff and implementing other improvements intended to stem the tabulation rates declines. In attachment G of our written testimony, you can see the results of that for a short period in October. Arbitron has been participating in the accreditation process fully. However, the fact remains that Arbitron's R&D process for the improvements required by the MRC have been ongoing post-commercialization for over 20 unaccredited markets. We have several recommendations on record with Arbitron to address these matters. In closing, the MRC has strived for 4 decades to be faithful to the mission Congress suggested for us. We hope the committee agrees that Arbitron should remain committed to the MRC process, maintain focus on the audit and methodological issues we raise, and ultimately focus on gaining the marketplace assurance of MRC accreditation of its PPM services as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chagrin?
Thank you. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee, my name is Cyril Chagrin, and I'm Executive Vice President, Corporate Research at Univision Communications, which owns and operates 68 local Spanish-language radio stations across the country. The focus of my testimony today is the serious flaws in Arbitron's personal people meter radio ratings measurement system and the adverse effects of those flaws on minority broadcasters and listeners. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I've worked in the media ratings industry for over 30 years. Thank you. I am here today because I'm concerned that the radio rating system is facing a crisis that threatens to undermine the gold radio marketplace. In 2007, Arbitron began rolling out as currency its PPM system and methodology. From the outset, Arbitron promoted the PPM system as a technological advance from the older paper diary system, a 21st century ratings technology. Maybe 21st century, the underlying research methodologies upon which the system is based is still very much stuck in the 20th century, are badly flawed, and are creating havoc in the radio marketplace. From the outset, the data provided under the PPM system, stuck in the 20th century, are badly flawed and are creating havoc in the radio marketplace. From the outset, the data provided under the PPM system evidenced erratic rating swings for which there is no plausible explanation other than the quality and reliability of the sample. For example, Univision's Los Angeles-based KLVE saw its ratings plummet 54% from first quarter 2008 to first quarter 2009. As Arbitron introduced the PPM system into over 30 markets nationwide, it submitted the system to the Media Ratings Council for accreditation. To date, the MRC, the independent industry body established by Congress to oversee media rating services, has failed to credit the PPM in all but 2 markets. The MRC's decision to withhold accreditation is not arbitrary. While MRC proceedings are confidential, the PPM system's flaws have been well documented in public sources and can be assumed to factor heavily in the MRC's accreditation decisions. First, Arbitron recruits from the wrong sample frame. Arbitron's primary sample frame includes only households with landline telephone numbers. Households with no telephones and cell phone-only households are excluded from the main sample frame. Minorities are present in these excluded categories at a much higher rate than other groups. Second, Arbitron includes cell phone-only households via a separate sample with very low response rates that is controlled to contribute 10 to 15% of the households in each market. But cell phone-only households are disproportionately young and minority. 25% of Hispanics live in cell phone-only households, as do 21.4% of African Americans and 41.5% of those aged 25 to 29. And of course, the number of cell phone-only households continues to grow month after month. Third, African American and Hispanic listeners are underrepresented in the sample panels. Arbitron has proved unable to meet its own internal metrics for minority participation in its sample panels. Even when there are enough, they are not representative. Fourth, Arbitron panels are too small. For example, in Atlanta, each African American panelist is assumed to represent 10,000 others. Fifth, PPM panelists do not receive the training or support they need to use the devices properly. Every single one of these issues is entirely fixable. All that is required for Arbitron is for Arbitron to apply the same commitment that it has shown to using 21st century ratings technology to implement 21st century research methodology. That means recognizing that in the 21st century, wireless America, an address-based sample is preferable to a landline-based sample. It means recognizing that in 21st century diverse America, in-person recruiting, a bigger, more representative sample, and robust participant training are not luxuries. They are necessities. Creating the kind of 21st century methodology is entirely possible. We know these things are possible because Arbitron has already done them in Houston. In Houston, Arbitron made the needed investment in an address-based sample frame and in-person recruitment, and as a result, the PPM system was given MRC accreditation. What's good enough for Houston should be good enough for the rest of America. Arbitron must reaffirm its genuine commitment to the MRC process, not simply going through the motions of the audit. Arbitron should agree that it will not make new rating systems currency in markets until the MRC has accredited them. Meanwhile, Arbitron should agree to maintain the previous diary-based system in parallel to the new electronic system until MRC provides accreditation. Maintaining the diary system service is the only alternative that allows buyers and sellers to have usable measurements during the time it takes Arbitron to address the flaws in the PPM service. These changes must be made in haste. Every day that passes, the ability of minority broadcasters to continue meeting the needs of our communities is threatened. The time for action is now. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to share these views with you today, and I would be pleased to answer any questions you or members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Honig?
Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee, my name is David Honig. I am the President and Executive Director of the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council, MMTC. MMTC is a member of the PPM Coalition, which consists of the Spanish Radio Association, Univision Communications, Inc., Spanish Broadcasting System, Entravision Communications Corporation, the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters, ICBC Broadcast Holdings, Border Media Partners, the Association of Hispanic Advertising Agencies, KJLH Los Angeles, and, of course, MMTC. I appreciate this opportunity to address the committee as it considers the effects of Arbitron's PPM on diversity in radio broadcasting. The Supreme Court has noted that it has long been a basic tenet of national communications policy that the widest dissemination of information from diverse and antagonistic sources is essential to the welfare of the public. Diversity means acknowledging, understanding, accepting, valuing, and celebrating differences among people with respect to age, class, ethnicity, gender, and race. True diversity in broadcast ownership will result in more diverse speech, more choices for listeners, and more owners who are responsive to their local communities and serve the public interest. Adequate representation of minority viewpoints in programming serves not only the needs and interests of the minority community, but also enriches and educates the non-minority audience. It enhances the diversified programming, which is a key objective of the Communications Act and the First Amendment. For example, 2 studies have clearly demonstrated that minority-oriented media produce a positive and measurable impact on the communities they serve. A 2005 study found that black-targeted newspapers and radio stations function as mobilizing channels for political participation among black voters. Controlling for the size of the black population in the market, the availability of black-targeted media had an elevating effect on black voter participation. And a 2006 study determined that voter turnout among Hispanic voters was 5 to 10 percentage points higher in areas with Spanish-language local news than in areas without that service. Thus, communication services to diverse audiences benefit our democracy as a whole in our continuing quest for opportunity and equality. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit has recognized that public policy places primary reliance with respect to diversification of content on media ownership, which has historically proven to be significantly influential with respect to editorial comment and the presentation of the news. This has proven to be true in recent months as minority audiences have been undercounted by the PPM rating services. All commercial broadcasters depend on advertising for their livelihood, and audience ratings are the sole method of determining the size of audiences that are available to listen to radio advertising messages. In the top 50 markets, Arbitron is the monopoly provider of radio audience measurement services. When minority audiences are undercounted, advertising dollars shrink or disappear altogether for those minority-targeted stations. The simplest solution for a standard profit-driven broadcaster would be to switch to a mainstream cookie-cutter format to program for the ratings. It has been the minority-owned broadcasters who have valiantly held to the task of serving their local minority communities with targeted formats. But true dedication alone will not pay the electric bill and make payroll. Without sure and quick relief, even the minority-owned stations will struggle to survive. And every time any one of these extraordinary radio voices fails, the fabric of our society becomes a bit more tattered. The obvious solution is for Arbitron to repair its broken methodology and provide the accurate survey data that the broadcasting and advertising industries have a right to expect. If Arbitron is not providing a product that meets legitimate expectations for accuracy and reliability, then the company should not be in a position to bind minority-targeted radio stations to grossly expensive contracts for years in the future. At the very least, these broadcasters should have the freedom to explore other options and seek a more responsible audience measurement service that cares about its mission. In the absence of this minimal level of relief, the committee should encourage the Federal Communications Commission to exercise its authority under Section 403 of the Communications Act and institute a full inquiry into Arbitron's practices and their impact on diversity and public welfare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before we start our questioning, I would like to recognize, I see in the audience, Commissioner Clyburn of the FCC. Thank you so much for coming as well, Commissioner Clyburn. Thank you. Let me move to ask, let me just begin with you, Mr. Skarzynski. In a letter to this committee in October, Arbitron represented that it is committed to the Media Rating Council accreditation process. Do you agree that the MRC standards and its codes of conduct ensure fair, accurate, and reliable rating data? You consider them as being, is it fair, reliable rating data?
Mr. Chairman, Arbitron is committed to the MRC process, and we believe that the MRC process does yield the result that you've just described.
Well, then, if that's the case, why is it that you've only been approved in 2 out of the 33? I mean, if that's the case. I mean, why would you continue to roll out if you really respect that process and feel that it's important? I mean, why would you continue to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Arbitron follows the rules of the MRC process. The MRC process does not require that an audience measurement service provider obtain accreditation prior to commercialization. The process to obtain accreditation can take many, many years. And this is the industry practice that audience measurement service providers not only in radio, but in television, internet, cable TV, print, while striving to get accreditation, can commercialize a market and a service. So we're following the rules. The important step before commercialization is that an audit is conducted, as Mr. Ivey has described, by a third party. In the case of Arbitron, Ernst & Young is the third-party auditor excuse me, who audits our markets prior to commercialization. And the audit process is a very lengthy, thorough, and detailed process. And pardon me. And I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, that as CEO of Arbitron, if there was a showstopper that came up in the context of the audit, that we would not commercialize a market. So we're following the rules. Accreditation can take many, many years.
You have to shorten your answers because
Nielsen, in its TV audience measurement, launched that electronic measurement started in 2002. And they have obtained probably 10 or 11 accredited markets at this point in time and are still seeking accreditation. So this is the industry practice.
Mr. Skarzinski, though, I mean, let's face it. Now, we're talking about 33 markets, and you only have approval in 2. I mean, I could see maybe 1 or 2 over, and then you're still working on it. But, I mean, to me, that seems like you're just totally ignoring and just doing whatever you want to do. I mean, that's what, there's a clear indication here. Let me just ask you, Mr. Ivey, what are the main reasons that the MRC has not granted accreditation to Arbitron in these 31 markets?
What are the reasons?
Yes.
Is that your question, Mr. Chairman?
That's the question.
Sure. Well, first of all, if I could just spend a second, because Mr. Skarzinski raised a rather complex issue. It is true that the MRC is not a government organization. We have no authority, and we were not designed to prevent a commercial enterprise from rolling out a product. We don't have that type of authority. However, we do have a voluntary code of conduct, and that voluntary code of conduct says that at minimum a rating service should have an audit before it commercializes a product and have that exposed to our audit committee so that we can decide whether it should be accredited or not, because that's what the marketplace relies on. However, the voluntary code of conduct goes on to make other recommendations. The voluntary code of conduct says that we would prefer that a rating service doesn't implement a product until it's accredited. And we also say that we would prefer that a rating service doesn't discontinue an accredited service before they get accreditation of a new product. So those preferences are stated, but you should know that because of the way we're structured as an organization, we don't enforce that. And we've been reviewed by the Department of Justice and the FTC, and, you know, when Nielsen, Mr. Skarzinski referenced Nielsen, they were rolling out products without getting accreditation. That led to 2 Senate hearings on the matter similar to this, where customers were saying, why is Nielsen rolling out these products? Why didn't the MRC accredit it? And Senate hearings happened. So this causes controversy. That's why we have those recommendations in our voluntary code. But we cannot enforce that because we're not a government organization. And I'm not asking you to set that power to us, but I'm just trying to explain the facts, that we state our preferences. We believe very strongly that an audit needs to be conducted and a marketplace should know whether accreditation is granted or not for those 30 markets so that they can either rely on that or not. Many, many customers look to accreditation as kind of like the good housekeeping seal. And when that's not present, they know that it's not present for a reason. As Ms. Shagrin said, we don't do that arbitrarily. So hope that clears it up. We've made numerous recommendations to Arbitron.
What was their response?
Well, Arbitron has implemented numerous recommendations. We still have some on the table. We're kind of getting to a stage where some of these recommendations are very tough because This methodology requires, if you put yourself, Mr. Chairman, in the position of a panelist for PPM, you have to wear this PPM device. You not only have to wear it when you're here, but you have to wear it at home. You have to wear it when you wake up in the morning. You have to carry it with you when you go to the bathroom, when you take a shower. When you come home from work, you carry that methodology with you, the meter with you. Those are human conditions and human cooperation that are difficult to gather. So we've made a lot of recommendations to Arbitron. We've got pages and pages of recommendations and letter. Arbitron has implemented many of those. Some of them have worked, some of them have not worked. And some of the more expensive ones, like sending people out to train householders on a wider basis, in person, on how to use the meter, having in-person contact to explain to people why it's important, etc. Those are very costly. So Arbitron is trying to balance the cost implications and the improvement implications in these services. And I can't speak for Arbitron in the matter, but I can tell you it's a very complex situation. We think we know a lot about what it takes to improve, and those recommendations are on the table. They're about in-person contact, more intense installation and training for the panelists, making sure that geographically the panel is representative. You know, there are a lot of issues that are on the table with us and Arbitron, and you know, you guys have subpoenaed our records and you have a lot of that information, and some of them are very confidential, so I don't know whether we should, because of the trade aspects, whether we should go into those in that much detail. I hope I answered your question.
Right. Thank you. Mrs. Skarzinski, why are you sort of resisting, you know, the suggestions and recommendations, and instead of making the changes, you just rather roll out? And I'm afraid that you're going to kill some of these radio stations, you know, if you continue to do this and not respond. I mean, some of them will be gone, you know, by the time many of these things might even be dealt with at all.
Mr. Chairman, we have a very active program to improve our service based on the recommendations that we have received from not only from our customers but also from Mr. Ivey and the MRC staff. And we don't feel that the service is flawed. We feel actually that for 9 markets, including the New York market, our performance in 2009 is very, very strong, and we feel we're performing at a level that deserves MRC accreditation. And I believe that we have supplied to the committee the actual reports that we submitted to the MRC last month to comment on our performance and to show the trends and to show where we are in particular markets, including New York. So we welcome the suggestions for improvements. We're making these improvements. Mr. Ivey commented on the training activities. We have a very, very extensive training program to bring in and orient a new panelist. We have local market coaches who go out into the field and help with a panelist. As a matter of fact, 2 Saturdays ago, I spent the afternoon with one of our local market coaches in Prince George's County here in Maryland, and worked with the panelists, this particular household, to help them through the process. So we're very, very active in trying to get all of our panelists to participate at a performance level. And we feel, certainly in the case of New York and these 9 markets, 8 other markets, that we're performing at a level that would earn us MRC accreditation.
Let me say what my problem is. My problem is that I'm looking and I see that some of these recommendations were made 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I'm also looking at the fact that there was one station in New York in particular that was rated number 1. And now that station is number 15, you know, without moving any place, going any place, doing anything, you know. But the point is that, you know, doesn't that bother you? But you rather just continue to roll out?
the health and prosperity
And the fact
of
that
our...
you have not, the fact that you have not moved to correct some of these recommendations over the past 2 years.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, we have implemented many of these recommendations. We have a program of over 60 initiatives that we have worked on and employed across all of our PPM markets. So I don't think it's correct to say that we are not acting on these recommendations, that we're not making these improvements. I would beg to differ, sir.
Yes, Mr. Honig, then we'll move along. Go ahead. Yes.
I'm a little disturbed by
You-
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little disturbed and disappointed by two things that Mr. Skarzinski has said that I think cut right to the heart of what this is about. One was that if there were some problem identified before going to currency that was a showstopper, the company would not go to currency. Let's look at what the problem was that was not enough to go to currency. 30, 40, 50, 60% declines in ratings for some stations. If there had been a new technology that had that impact on voter participation, or on school segregation, or on equal employment, or on fair housing, or environmental protection, that would be a showstopper by any standard. It would be a national scandal. Because this affects democracy so deeply, it is just as much of a scandal. The other thing that disturbed me was, and I appreciate the good intentions, that the company is going to begin to develop an engagement index. The difficulty is that that's been a recommendation that we've been waiting for 3 years, and it's not that difficult. And there just comes a time when you just can't rely alone on promises and have to begin to undertake some oversight based on past history.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shagrin. And my time is, I think, expired. I think there's something wrong with this clock. I know I've been talking for more than 5 minutes. You know,
That's okay. We like
you know,
what you're saying. I want to reinforce what Mr. Honig said in terms of showstoppers. I think a major issue here is the fact that some of these problems, most of the problems that we are seeing today, we saw in the early audits in the markets that were originally rolled out. And we brought those both as individual customers and through the MRC to Arbitron and saying, you have some basic problems, we have some basic concerns. Had they stopped then and addressed those, we probably wouldn't have 33 markets out there that have identities. The problem today is that now there are 33 that need fixing or 31 that need fixing, and it gets much, much more difficult and more costly. There is some way and some stoppage.
time to Ms. Chu. Yes. Thank you. Gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Skarzinski, according to the PPM Coalition, Arbitron's flawed methodology in the PPM has been an issue for the past 60 years. In the meantime, minority radio stations are experiencing a precipitous drop in their ratings and a corresponding loss in advertising revenues. I've learned that companies like Univision, whose main market is a Spanish-speaking population, has decided to opt out of the PPM measurement system because it no longer makes business sense. And as a result, there is no other measurement options. And there are other drastic situations, such as a 70% decline in radio station ratings for certain stations, and one station going from a ranking of 1 to 21. And in fact, that station no longer exists on the airwaves. This seems to me like a very drastic situation, and it's been going on for at least 6 years. And yet, from what I hear from you, it seems like you see this as no problem. You see the situation as not a problem. And so I want to know, do you even think of this as a problem? And if so, then is your company taking any steps to rectify the situation?
Congresswoman, we began the rollout of PPM just a few years ago, not 6 years ago. The transition from the pen and paper diary, I'm holding up a copy of the diary, to the electronic form of measurement was something that was desired by the radio industry. We worked with the radio industry to develop the PPM technology. The concerns of our customers we're very sensitive to the concerns of our customers. The issue of a loss in rating is something that has occurred in the transition from the pen and paper diary to the PPM. It has affected many broadcasters, not simply urban or Hispanic broadcasters, because we learned in going from diary to PPM. Diary is based on a recall factor. I fill out this diary once a week and I try to recall, perhaps I do it at the end of the week, what stations did I listen to? In the diary, and I have a chart that captures listening. I don't know if it's possible to put this on the screen. The PPM captures listening exposure chart. But in this example, for a black male, I don't know if we can get the chart on the screen. A black male filled out the diary and filled out the diary and said, here are the 2 radio stations that I listened to. And when 1 year later, when the PPM service was, and I listened to these 2 stations and I listened to them for 8 hours a day. Once the PPM audience measurement service had been established, it was found that this, and here's the chart on the right, that instead of listening, of course this listener did listen to those 2 stations, but actually listened to 4 or 5 other stations and didn't listen to radio 8 hours a day. So what we do is measure exposure to radio, and the fact that in the diary, the radio, because of the great loyalty of radio listeners, the diary keeper was saying, I listened to just these 2. In fact, you see a very different result. And that is a true measure of what is the listener is, how the listener is exposed to radio, as opposed to just a recall factor. And I think this is an important point to make, that it has affected a variety of different broadcasters and a variety of different formats: talk radio, Christian radio, Hispanic radio, urban radio. The talk radio host Sean Hannity had a 60% decline when we moved from diary to PPM, and it was in this experience that while there is a loyal base of listeners, that the listeners were doing more than listening just to Sean Hannity. And in the exposure to radio that you get in PPM, you see that there is a greater selection, a greater number of radio stations that a listener is covering, and that they're actually not listening to radio eight hours a day.
So I presume you're saying there is no problem.
We don't believe that our methodology or our technology has flaws. We think that we have a solid methodology and a solid technology, and we think that even as you look at the performance of panelists by different demographics, that the performance of panelists, or urban and African American and Hispanic panelists, is at the same level in our panel as those of any other demographic.
Actually, though, I do see one big problem, which has to do with the lack of Spanish-speaking participants in your PPM ratings panels. In fact, I have a very large Hispanic population in my district in California, and I think this is a very serious deficit. What efforts have you made to ensure that there is more Spanish-speaking participants, so that there is a more accurate rating?
Congresswoman, we take great care in standing up a panel that matches the demographics of the market. we start with the census data that are updated every year by a firm called Claritas, and every year in the month of October, we're updating the panel to reflect any changes in the demographics. So that is to say, for a given market, we would have as many percentage-wise, as many males and females as there are in the census data updated annually by Claritas, as many white, African American, and Hispanic listeners as percentage-wise as there are in the market. And then we look at it in several age groups, 6 to 17, 18 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 55, 55 and older. We take very careful, we do our work very, very carefully to select a panel that is representative of the market that we're serving. And in terms of recruitment of Hispanic panelists or prospective Hispanic panelists, and this was an improvement recommendation that actually came from our customers and also from the MRC, we're recruiting the panelists, a Hispanic panelist prospect, we're recruiting them with a Spanish speaker.
Are you late additional 1 minute so Mr. Ivy and can respond? Give the gentlewoman an additional minute. Yes.
If possible, Scott, I referred in my oral testimony to some charts that were attached to our written testimony, and Scott made some copies of some of them to put on an overhead. And
Your mic on? Your mic on? We're having trouble hearing you.
It looks like it's on. Exhibit F, if you pull up Atlanta, which is the first market, and I know the chart is small, but basically, people have been talking about specifics. What specifically are the issues? And this is an illustration of one issue. This shows young panelists that are 18 to 34-year-olds in Atlanta, and how they cooperated with the PPM device over time. So on the average day, how many young panelists carried and had their data accepted by Arbitron for processing in the ratings. So as you see in January, that number was around 70 for the red line, which is females, and a little above 70 for the blue line, which was males. And those rates, we look at and we say, okay, well, those are nearing reasonableness. Keep in mind that that means 30% almost of the people don't carry their PPM or don't have their data processed. But one of the things that we've noticed during 2009, that rate went down. You can see the decline in that chart. And Scott, if you would put up the next market in alphabetical order, which is Boston, you'd see that those numbers declined. And by September, those were at 65, which means 35% of the panelists of that age group don't carry their PPM don't comply with that methodology on the average day. So, and then so on. Scott could put up Chicago, the next chart. You take a look at the trend in Chicago. And then further into the packet is New York. In deference to you, Chairman, from New York, you could look at New York. And you'll see that the trend at the end of New York is not going down. It's going up. Important point. Arbitron took some action and put in more procedures to interact with panelists in New York during that time frame where those numbers are going up. More in-person interaction, we believe. And those are parts of the recommendations that the MRC is trying to push Arbitron to make. They didn't make that improvement yet in the other markets. I attached Exhibit G to the testimony, and they started to make some of those improvements in October. So, Scott, if you put up Atlanta for October in Exhibit G, remember that chart was all the way down by September. You see that now the end of that chart is going up, so more panelists are beginning to comply. This is a very complex issue. We're trying to improve the performance of this service, and Arbitron is trying to cooperate, and they're implementing some of our recommendations, and some of them they're looking at, and they're saying, well, they're too expensive, whatever, and they're trying to make improvements. The MRC is not going to credit this methodology until issues like this reach a level that we believe, with a collective voting of the MRC membership, are appropriate. We don't have written standards for what that is, because every meter technology is different and the diary is different, but issues like this, and this one's very visible. This is just males 18 to 34 and females 18 to 34. There are other things that are more granular about the technology and things where we're in dialogue with Arbitron, but this is an illustration of a key issue. So you wanted specifics? This is very specific. You saw declines during 2009, which caused us pause when we're going to credit this service. How do we know what people do when they don't carry the PPM? What do they do? What do they listen to on the radio? Are they exposed to radio? Are they not? Are they exposed the same as when they do carry the PPM? Arbitron's even done some studies of that, but they're very small. So we're wrestling with these issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now yield 5 minutes to...
Mr. Chairman, could I make a comment, please, on Mr. Ives'
actually,
charts?
let me just yield to the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for this hearing. Because causality is always a difficult issue under the best of circumstances, I take it the panel would agree that with the growth in people of color in our country, that radio should see a growth overall in listeners from people of color. Could we agree on that?
Yes, I would, Congresswoman.
Mr. Straczynski, I have to tell you I am no Luddite. And I understand what you are trying to do. Indeed, I was impressed with the series of graphs involving one man. I should have thought that anybody, by the way, getting back a diary that said they did anything 8 hours a day would have understood that that meant that they weren't doing that continually. So I'm impressed by the difference and what you capture. I'd be much more impressed with seeing that captured with a sample rather than one man. I can pick out one man any day of the week and prove anything you would like. I understand what you are getting at, but until you show me a sample that shows that kind of pattern, I'm not sure I am convinced. Look, what's at issue here may be the life and death of one of the most viable industries for people of color. So obviously there's going to be some concern in the Congress about that, and particularly about these fluctuations. I am super sensitive to what's happening to every business of every kind in the United States today. The only entity able to write a check today is the United States government, and that's because we don't have to have the money in the bank. So I understand that every industry is affected, and yet it would seem to me that there's an obligation on the part of the Congress to try to ask the question that I ask of you, Mr. Straczynski. How can we, can you say with any certainty that PPM is not a significant ingredient in what is happening to stations, minority-owned stations, and that the rest of it must be something else, like the recession? Can you say that with any certainty?
Congressman, we do not believe that PPM is the root cause of problems.
On what is that belief grounded? On what is it based?
The radio industry is suffering right now, as you noted, Congresswoman, with the general economy. There has been a decline in revenue for all broadcasters.
Are you seeing these declines equally among stations that service majority populations and minority populations? No difference whatsoever.
There have been, in terms of revenue declines, there have been the same revenue declines percentage-wise for the general market as has been the case for Hispanic and urban broadcasters.
Whatever you are basing that on, you say the general market, that would include minority stations. I'm asking stations that I can name some in the District of Columbia, that target certain areas which we know to be largely white, as opposed to stations which target areas where the population is minority. Have you that kind of research on which you would base what you have just said to this committee?
We do, Congresswoman. When I was referring to the general market, I was referring to, that's a term in the radio industry, general meaning not stations that are targeted at an urban or Hispanic broadcaster. And I believe Mr. Liggins of Radio 1 is going to speak in the next segment of the panel, and he can share with you the specific details.
All right, I've read Mr. Liggins' testimony. I know him. I respect him. Indeed, Radio 1 is located in my district, and therefore I was very, very interested in his testimony. Of course, Mr. Liggins sits at the helm of an empire, not simply a station, and I admire what he and Kathy Hughes have done, love them dearly. Are you, in fact, telling this committee that all the other minority stations have to do is to do what Radio 1 did, alter their programming, and they will increase their PPM ratings? Is that your advice to stations not a part of an empire, which may have been able more easily to make this change? Just do what Radio 1 did, and you fellas are going to be all right.
Well, Congresswoman, we're not in the business of advising radio broadcasters what to do, and of course the programming decisions are the decisions made by the individual broadcaster. I cited in my oral testimony that Stevie Wonder station, KJLH in the Los Angeles area, looked at, in this particular case, the programming director of that station looked at the PPM data, which is very granular data, and made a decision to switch over to the Steve Harvey
What would keep a station from simply incorporating what you say these successful stations have done? What would make a station not want to do that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
What would keep a minority-owned station from doing what Radio 1 and the station you have just cited did? What keeps them from doing it, in your view?
There would be no obstacle in having them make that change.
Well, do you have an answer to that, Ms.?
I would love to answer that. I think what keeps us from doing that is if we thought that these were reliable and accurate estimates, then we would do what we do with other audience estimates and use it to make programming decisions. But given the inaccuracy of the sample and the fact that the people providing that information are not representative of Hispanics or of African Americans, we cannot make programming decisions. When I started out in this business and I tried to explain to someone at an English language broadcast network that the differences he was seeing was because the universe was changing, he said to me, "I don't care if it's right or wrong, I just want to program to the sample." We don't believe that at Univision. We believe that we have an obligation to the 15 million Hispanic radio listeners to provide them with entertainment and with information they need. And we are not going to change our programming until we have samples that are representative of those listeners, and then we can use that information to improve. We're not going to do it based on bad information.
Mr. Honig, you had a response.
I wanted to cut right to this question of causation. Mr. Skarzinski correctly recognizes that This is not the only problem, the only burden facing minority radio. Those stations also are burdened by lack of access to capital, by weaker signals historically, by outdated engineering rules, by EEO non-enforcement, and by advertisers that won't consider advertising on them simply because of the race of members of the audience. Those problems have existed for years, and notwithstanding them, as horrible as they are, stations continue to perform well in those formats until they get disrupted by PPM. You see the numbers collapse in the markets where currency has been granted, and only in those markets over the last 2 years have the numbers collapsed. That's about as clear a case of causation as you can see. It certainly is no justification for this kind of practice that there are other deficiencies. It was no justification for school segregation that there was housing segregation, for example. Nor is it an answer to say that there are some broadcasters that have managed to overcome or adjust. No one should have to adjust the heart of their business because of a flawed technology.
Gentlewoman's time has expired, and let me just say before I move to the gentlewoman from California, a comment was made that indicated that the majority and minority decline has been basically the same. It's my understanding that that's not true. I mean, Mr. Skarzinski indicated that basically the same when he responded to the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C. Is that true?
Based on the last time I saw ratings data, that is not true. The there have been declines across English language stations and urban stations and Spanish stations, but the decline for minority stations have been significantly larger than they have been for the other stations.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that the data Mr. Skarzinski was relying on be submitted to the chairman so that the committee can evaluate that data for itself?
Right.
Yes, I'd be happy to provide the data.
Without objection, we'll receive it. Gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Just an observation, where's the other side of this committee?
Great observation.
The subject matter probably is of little interest. Just an observation. I'm listening very intently because I represent the area where KJLH's listeners are. That's Stevie Wonder's station. And Mr. Skarzinski, I understand that you look at census data to weigh your numbers to account for any under or over represented demographic groups. And my question or problem is that the census has a historical tendency to undercount youth, low income, and minority households. I sit on the census subcommittee, and one of the things I brought to the attention of the director of the census is that in certain areas there's always an undercount, and because of that undercount we are denied the funds that should come based on certain demographics. Do you account for this historical undercount of the census when compiling and analyzing your data, and if so, how do you do it?
Congresswoman, we look at census data and then we update it each year during the month of October with data from Claritas. So the way that we would focus on the total market to get a representative sample would be to use both the census data and the Claritas data, and to go after...
What is the difference between...
The census data you know about.
Yes, I know about.
Since you care for it here in the Congress. The Claritas data is a update from a third-party private, not the government, but from a third-party private firm that looks at census and tries to update it for any possible shifts that occur within a given year. But to go after a representative sample and to care for particularly African American and Hispanic listeners, we focus on what we call high density areas and try to get as representative a group of African American and Hispanic listeners for the total market within certain high density areas.
Let me just say this, that's one of the problems. Yes, there's high density, but they don't get counted. And I am a witness of that. I live in the community. And I can tell you that because of the fear some of our non-English speaking citizens or people have, they don't give an accurate count. So I usually call in the census people and tell them how to go about the count. You go out on a Sunday after church services. You go to the parks, you go to the parking lot, you go above the liquor stores and the cleaners, and you can get a better indication. We are historically undercounted, and it hurts us. You mentioned KJLH as a success story. It's not. And I was so disappointed that the people I usually go in for interviews with are now gone, and they've gone to syndication. So we're not really getting that information to this broad listening audience out of the community that KJLH served. And, you know, it's not real, it's syndicated. So the little peculiarities that exist in the community are not really identified through interviews from the representatives, such as those people at the county level, at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level. That's one of my problems. So I don't want to be that critical of the use of portable people meter, the PPM, and we find it's not focused on the underlying technology, but on the method used to recruit the people who have their radio habits measured. And you stated that Arbitron plans to increase the sample size by 10% beginning in 2010. But I worry this is insufficient because since the introduction of the PPM, the panels have become 66% smaller. And so my question is, why did Arbitron reduce their panel size by 66% with the introduction of the PPM?
Congresswoman, when we moved from the diary to the PPM, we had in any given market a paper and pen diary, and we would issue this for 2 weeks of the year, 2 weeks in the year, sorry, or 4 weeks in the year. So in the larger markets, 4 weeks a year of data were the data for the diary keepers. When we moved to PPM, we have 365 days a year, 52 weeks a year of data, and the data that we would have accumulated from the diary versus the PPM, it's a multiplier of probably 8, a factor of increase of 8 to get the data and the timely and granular data minute by minute, what are you listening to, as between PPM and diary. So in making that migration or transition from the pen and paper diary to PPM, we reduced our panel size on a ratio of 3 to 1, and we did that really and studied what Nielsen had done when they went from their pen and paper television diary to their electronic form of measurement. They actually went from 4 to 1 in terms of reduction. So we made this reduction, and we did it because we were trying to maximize the use of persons' days of an individual person that we're recording for 352 weeks a year.
Mr. Chairman, if you could yield me one more minute, I just wanted to see what some of the other panelists might be able to suggest as to how we can balance the need.
Additional minute.
Yeah, thank you. To cut costs with the responsibility to provide a sample size that is statistically reliable, and maybe some of the rest of you can give some input to this.
First of all, I'd like to comment on your earlier comments about representative samples, because my concern here, and what I believe is part of the problem and why we're here, is that we, the customers, have talked. We have sat in meetings and we have talked to Mr. Skarzinski and other folks at Arbitron, but they aren't listening. The root cause and the main problem that you touched on is that the samples that they're using are not representative. And they may tell you that, yeah, they have enough PPM carriers in your district, but are those carriers representative of the people who actually live in your district? Because how many of the people that you know that live in your district would accept carrying a meter for 2 years on the basis of getting a telephone call asking them to do so? The people who live in your area, the people who are listening to urban radio, who are listening to Spanish radio, are among the groups that are the hardest to get to cooperate. And because they're so hard to get to cooperate, you can't just call them on the phone and ask them to do it. You might be able to call them and ask them to fill this out for a week. You can't call them and ask them to carry this around for 2 years. It's a very different task. And so the people who do agree to do it are less representative and not representative of those listeners that are listening to urban radio and listening to Spanish radio. And therefore, they're not represented. You get the older members of those minority groups. You don't get the younger members of those minority groups. And all the weighting in the world can't adjust for a bad sample.
I just have to comment, and I'll get back that minute. part of it. But our kids are going around with their iPhones and their cell phones and so on. They're certainly not going to carry that meter when they could be looking at their other pieces of equipment, and it creates a problem for us in the community. I thank you for yielding me extra time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we yield time, 5 minutes, to the gentleman from Virginia, Congressman Connolly.
I thank the chairman and thank the panel for being here. Ms. Shagrin and perhaps others on the panel, to what extent are some of the problems caused here by the fact that we, for good or ill, Arbitron is a monopoly?
Well, I don't think that, I think there are a lot of people who would make other choices. They are, and I think there are other people who aren't in this room or represented by anyone that's on any of the panels that would make other choices. We're not the only ones that are aware of the failings of the current rating system. And again, it's not the technology I'm talking about. It's sample. It's getting them to agree to be in the sample and then provide usable data on a regular basis.
Got it. So your problem, the technology is fine.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. You work with a good sample, but I'm assuming that it does measure radio.
Okay, it's the sample. Mr. Ivey, would you concur? You got to speak up, sir. You got to put that.
My mic wasn't on.
Thank you.
I would phrase that a little differently. I think what's important to remember, and Ms. Shagrin said it initially, is when you approach somebody to carry this device, a certain amount of them agree to carry it and a certain amount of them don't. And the more that agree to carry it out of the original sample, the better the sample is,
well,
generally.
Let me ask you a question about that, following up on the comments you've made and Ms. Shagrin made. What's the failure rate? What percentage of people who agree initially actually end up dropping out?
Well, so if you look at a response rate for the service, which is I approached 1,000 people to carry this device, how many of them actually agreed? Those numbers are ranging from...
No, I'm not asking that question. Of those who've agreed,
Right.
What's the dropout rate?
It's, in general, across the population, it's about 25%.
25%?
But if you look
For the
at that
PPM?
focused in, yes. if
Mr.
you
Ivey,
look at-
Congressman, if I could answer the
I have a limited
question.
amount of time.
If I could answer the question.
I was going to turn to you in a second. 25% is your estimate of the people on PPM who drop out.
Right, but that's differential among different groups of the population.
Fair
Younger
enough.
people drop out more than older people.
Got it. I'm sorry, Mr. Smicinski, you wanted to comment?
We stand up a panel for a 2-year period in a given PPM market. A panelist can serve on average for 12, 13, 14 months. When that panelist leaves, we replace that panelist with someone who is identical in demographic to that panelist.
But is the dropout rate for PPM higher than the previous dropout rate for the diary?
We're mixing two issues, I'm sorry.
It's a different methodology.
I understand.
The diary is only for 1 week. If you serve for the week, then you're done.
So you're not concerned with the dropout rate being a problem?
We don't, in our methodology, we don't think that figure is a bad figure.
I understand, but you've heard testimony here from your fellow panelists that part of the problem may be less the technology and more the size of the sample. If the sample size itself is too small and unrepresentative, and then a fairly significant chunk of that sample drops out, your sample is even smaller and less representative. That's sort of where I'm getting. Mr. Ivey, did you want to comment?
But
Yeah,
the,
I wanted
the
to comment.
comment I was making, Congressman, if Ms. Shagrin was in the panel and she drops out, we're not saying that panelist goes away. We fill that seat with someone from a comparable, identical demographic.
Okay, so you think the dropout problem is non-existent?
Because of the way we would make a replacement, it is not the issue.
Ms. Schaff,
Well, first of all,
speak up, please.
African Americans and Spanish-speaking Hispanics or Hispanics drop out more than non-minority panelists. And certainly the kids and teens are so bad, I don't even want to get into that. But, you know, heaven help you if that's who you're programming to or that's who you're trying to advertise to.
Right.
The point is that if I were in the panel and I drop out, he might try to get someone else, but all he knows is a phone number and some general characteristics of the household. Last time I read an audit report, you were not doing quota sampling, but you're getting close.
Gotcha.
The point is that the person they get may be female, may live in a household where they're the only person, as I do, but what they choose to listen to may be completely different than what I choose to listen to because of my ethnic background,
Right.
because of my professional background. So just because you lose some, the people who agree, I mean, there's been very extensive studies done now on non-response. The people who agree are not necessarily representative of the people who don't agree, which is why I am such a strong proponent of in-person recruiting.
Mr. Ivey?
Yes, I'm just concerned that might be mixing terminology. You can drop out of the sample permanently. In other words, you could call Arbitron, I no longer want to participate permanently. They call that a dropout. What I was quoting, the 25%, are failures of people to carry the PPM on the average day. So they remain in the panel, and then if they don't carry it today, they're still in the panel tomorrow, and they can either carry it or not.
Gotcha.
That's about 25%. And that's not a dropout. That's just a failure that day to tabulate. That varies a lot by demography. Younger people drop out more than older. Young blacks, especially young African Americans, they drop out of this panel much more than, let's say, other young people.
I'm going to have time for just one more question, if the chair will indulge me, and then I got to go. And I'll start with you, Mr. Ivey. The MRC has not accredited Arbitron's PPM service in New York, Philadelphia, and Houston. Why is that, and could whatever problems are reflected in those markets possibly be affecting the market here in Washington, D.C., which, after all, the city itself is a majority minority population surrounded with huge minority populations, and intuitively it just seems hard to believe that a lot of those minority-owned and broadcasting radio stations are precipitously declining.
Yes, first of all, just a clarification, we have accredited Houston. We haven't accredited, and we've accredited Riverside. All the other markets are not accredited, just to clarify. There are three principal reasons why the markets that aren't accredited aren't accredited. The first is the response rates to the service are lower than we would expect. So earlier I mentioned the 1,000 people you approach, how many people eventually say they will cooperate? If the closer that number, or the lower that proportion is, the less likely that sample is to be representative of the population, even if you replace them, because you might replace them with other people that you think look alike, but they might behave differently. It's nuance. So response rates to these services, and they're in Exhibits F and G of my written testimony, are lower than we would like. The second issue is non-compliance or non-tabulation rates in general. That 25% rate that I quoted, generally, it had been worse than that. Arbitron has been making improvements. Those rates are still a major concern of ours, that overall not enough people are having the data gathered from the service. And then the third, and perhaps most important, I mentioned that people that don't cooperate differentially. So young African American adults, for example, while I showed that chart in Atlanta and Boston that showed how they look, if you looked at that chart for young African Americans, those numbers would even be lower. Sometimes they're 60, sometimes they're 65%. That means that 40% of the people don't carry their PPM on the average day. So automatically you've heard talk about sample sizes and how Arbitron, and this is legitimate, they reduced the overall sample size from the diary because you get a lot of measurement from people, so you're allowed to do that. But then, if 40% of young African Americans fall out of tabulation because they don't carry it, that puts even more stress on your sample. If you're relying on that target, then you're relying on only that reporting sample. And that's a smaller group. So I've explained three principal issues. Those are the three key issues that we're focused on getting Arbitron to improve. They're very critical. We're not going to credit until we believe those have been improved to a sufficient degree, and those samples report in a representative manner across various types of demography. We're not going to credit until that happens.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, my time is up, and I thank you for your indulgence. I do want to say that representing the local area here in the National Capital Region, Mr. Ivy's just put his finger, I think, on, with the best of intentions, the methodology can lead to results that have devastating impacts on minority-owned broadcasters and radio stations, and we've already seen that here in the National Capital Region. So I thank you for holding this hearing, and I look forward to working with Arbitron and others to see if we can't make sure that we're all at a certain comfort level with the data and what it means. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the gentleman for his statement. And I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member, Congressman Issa.
I thank the chairman, and I apologize for my having to go back and forth. We have a markup in judiciary next door, and as you know, as important as hearings are, markups are recorded. The questions that I have, I think, are going to deal with accuracy, but maybe with some rhetorical questions. Ms. Shagrin, you were at Nielsen for 25 years, right?
27, yes.
27. Were you perfectly accurate? Were there complaints by stations, TV stations, that your ratings were skewed, inaccurate, not what they wanted? In other words, if you didn't give them the number they want, did they complain?
Not so much.
Can you turn your mic on?
I'm sorry. For a long period of time, there were Arbitron and Nielsen were both measuring local television, and there was and sure they liked the ones that were the
okay.
station.
Well, let's follow up on that questioning a little bit. You called yourself a customer. Now, aren't you really an audited firm, but not a customer in the true sense? When you buy the results, choose to buy the results, you're somewhat of a customer. But realistically, aren't you simply being audited for honesty, integrity, a little like a public SEC company? They pay PricewaterhouseCoopers, but in a sense, PricewaterhouseCoopers' allegiance is to the truth. Isn't that true?
That's true, but I am a customer. I work for Univision, and I am a customer.
Right, but Enron was a customer of their accounting firm, and we had a national scandal because Enron got the accounting it wanted. Are you entitled to the accounting you want, or are you entitled to the best accounting available, and that's what you have to ask for, is the best and most accurate numbers available? Which is it?
The best accounting available.
Okay, so I'm going to go
However, sometimes there is no best accounting.
Very true, and that's exactly the follow-up I want. Mr. Skarzinski, you're not perfect. Your numbers aren't perfectly accurate. Isn't that true?
Absolutely true.
And-
I'm not perfect, and our numbers are not perfect.
And even though
it's
I know
a
you
random
don't-
sample.
And even though I understand you don't release the exact amounts, you pay blacks, Hispanics, and young people more money to carry these PPMs than you do overall. In other words, there's a skew toward the hard-to-get groups, hard-to-get-to-carry groups. Is that true?
We do pay a differential incentive in some markets if we're having problems getting that
Okay,
panelist
but differential
to-
is a term for more.
Correct.
Okay, so you pay more when you believe you're not getting the level of carry that you need to get the accuracy you need, right?
We do on some
Okay.
occasions, yes.
Was that tendency as evident when you were doing paper diaries as it is when they're carrying a completely accurate electronic device?
In terms of a differential response,
Yes.
yes, it was.
So you already had this. This is not a new problem. This is a problem that already existed.
It would have been, and we do have a diary market today for the markets number 49 through 303, so we do see that in the diary.
Okay, so we do have a problem. Young people love to carry a cell phone but have a problem with a pager when it doesn't deliver messages to them. Perhaps if you could embed your rating system in a cell phone and hand them a cell phone, this problem would go away. If you gave someone a free cell phone for a year or two, I guarantee you'd have a high carry rate with the young.
Well, Congressman, that was Congresswoman Watson's suggestion to us, and actually that's a next-generation product for us that we're looking at just
So
that.
as soon as you get that, Diane and I don't have to be berating you in a public hearing, right?
Well, I certainly don't view it as being berated.
Look, anytime you're called monopolistic at the opening, you've got a little bit of a problem with the dais. I am concerned, along with the chairman, that in fact there's an accuracy question. I'm going to close with one question. I want to be very succinct here today. Is the electronic machine, the PPM machine, in dispute as to its accuracy here today? Is there anyone that's disputing it? I only want to see a yes if you're disputing the accuracy of the product. Is it reasonably fail-safe? Okay, seeing no response, what we have is a better piece of equipment. Mr. Skarzinski, what I hear today is that your purported customer, and I view the advertiser, having been an advertiser, as your most important customer because I demand the accuracy in order to make good decisions with my money, which ultimately I'm her customer as an advertiser, and that's what we're trying to achieve when we're on the other side of it. Can you just briefly tell us how does this committee have a high confidence that with an accurate piece of equipment you're going to take care of the other problems that today have been called in doubt? And Mr. Liggins is going to be up in a minute, and he is a little different than this first panel. He actually, although he's going to talk about the same problems, he's hopeful that you're going to get there. Would you tell us how you're going to get to the level of accuracy, knowing that the tool isn't the problem, but in fact that these other problems exist? What are you going to do in the next 12 months so you don't have to be back here again?
Well, Congressman, we are improving our performance. Mr. Ivey put up some charts there and talked about how we're performing in certain levels. If you were to look at in Appendix B of our written testimony, we have the data for all of our markets that goes through the month of November. We're performing at a much higher level for all markets. It's based on improvements that we're making to the sample size and the sample quality that we're making across the board. We're getting these suggestions from our customers and from the MRC staff. And we're committed to making our service the very best service that it can be.
Thank you very much. If anyone else wants to answer briefly.
Thank you, Congressman. First, I should have put my hand up when you asked if anyone questioned the accuracy of it, because it's accurate if you're talking about measuring stations that are encountered. If what you're trying to find out is what people listen to, it isn't and can't possibly be accurate, because people often encounter stations and they're not listening. They're not paying attention. They're not listening to the advertisements. The other question that I think you're going to is really the heart of what we're here for, which is, what is the duty of care? These things are understandably relative, but we have a lot of precedent on that. This is somewhat analogous to the reason why we hold surgeons to a higher standard than general practitioners. What we have here is a company engaged in the highest level of statistical research. This isn't a sophomore class in statistics learning how to do this. And you find, surprisingly, someone who used to teach sophomore statistics, you find grossly unrepresentative samples by race, ethnicity, and age. You find the lack of a measure of engagement such that those who command high loyalty, whether it be black or Spanish radio personalities or Sean Hannity, are undercounted.
Now, I'd be happy to hear more, but the chairman has limited ability to give me time, and this hearing is strictly on the diaries versus the PPM. So to a great extent, we're trying to limit how, with the new tool, changes need to be made to be more accurate. We can't necessarily look at the entire history of everything that's not right with this company. So, Ms. Shagrin, if you had something briefly, please.
The tool may accurately record and report what people are exposed to. But the gist of the matter is, are the people who are carrying the tool representative of U.S. America in all ways, and for minorities as well as non-minorities, by age? And that, I think, the answer to that question is no. The best tool in the world with a bad sample does not give you good data.
Thank you. Thank you for a succinct answer.
Thank you. Ranking member's time has long expired. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Skansky, taking into account that I believe Arbitron has been sued by 4 attorney generals, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Florida. Taking into account that Arbitron has failed to receive accreditation from the MRC for many of the markets. Taking into account that there's been issues about methodology. Taking into account the testimony we've heard here and people who are sitting behind you. Wouldn't it be better for you to listen more to your direct customers and try to implement some changes while keeping the accuracy of the information than having a legislative fix?
Congressman, we listen to our customers, and we have a set of improvements that we've made based on customer input that has improved our performance. And as I mentioned in response to Congresswoman Chu's question, we feel that we're performing at a level in 9 markets, including New York, where we have earned MRC accreditation. So we're very open to receiving inputs. We have a very active program to take any changes, any improvements that we make, and not just put them in one market, but put them in all markets. And we're committed to making our service the very best service that we can make.
Can you, Ms. Shagiri?
I'd like to ask Mr. Ivey to confirm or not confirm the statement that Mr. Skarzinski just made about 8 or 9 markets being ready to be accredited.
I mean, with all respect. I thought it was only 2 markets.
You don't earn accreditation until we grant it, so it's not earned yet. I mean, that's simply how I would state that. I do want to correct one thing, or at least make a statement, because I don't want to leave the committee with a misimpression. The ranking member, Issa, was talking about paying people more to, if they're African American or they're problematic in terms of cooperation, gaining cooperation from. We don't think, Arbitron provides substantial incentives to people, financial incentives to carry this device and participate. We are actually not of the opinion that a lot more money is what's necessary here in terms of payments to panelists. In fact, there's an element of danger there. Like if you pay people too much, they might change their behavior based on that, and you don't want to change their behavior, you want to measure their behavior. So we're looking at other avenues, more contact to panelists, training to panelists, strategies to convince them, a young African-American panelist, why it's important to carry this device, why it's meaningful to them as a, it doesn't message back to you. It's not a cell phone or something.
Let me,
it's not a money thing.
No, thank you very much. Let me just ask a few more questions. What happened with those 4 suits that were brought in by the Attorney Generals? There were questions on the methodology, the issues that are being brought up here today. Is that correct?
The suits were focused on the allegation that we're undercounting minorities.
Which is sort of the same type of testimony we're hearing today from Mr.
In part, I think.
Were those suits settled?
We have not. We have settled the suits with the New York Attorney General, the New Jersey Attorney General, and the Maryland Attorney General, and we are meeting all of our obligations under those settlements. The Florida Attorney General came up just in the last few months, and we're in discussions with the Florida Attorney General.
Okay. So they were settled on the basis that there were questions about methodology, similar issues that we're bringing up today?
Not questions on methodology so much as the issue around the allegation of undercounting black and Hispanic listeners.
Which is a concern that I think it's being brought up here today.
Yes, it is.
So,
and in the settlement...
Why wait for a lawsuit or why wait for a legislative fix? I mean, why not just sit down with the customers and still, have the end result of getting accurate information? Why not sit down? I mean, if I was a monopoly, it'd be a lot easier for me to say, be different than if I had 4 or 5 other competitors that were providing the same service. I don't want to tell you how to run your business, but if I had customers that have been forced to go into 2 years instead of 1 week, questions about the, instead of using census, demographic information, using your own target levels for demographic representativeness on the panels, cutting down the participants when you had the diary by 66%. I mean, those are legitimate questions. Look, the way I see it, I come from a district that's about 78% Hispanic, minority, mainly Hispanics. I come from the census has now turned pretty much minority majority state now. You look at the demographics for the United States, you look at the purchasing powers of Hispanics, if you include the blacks, it'd be higher. I mean, those customers there, I mean, the way I see it, I mean, either you're going to be sued or you're going to get a legislative fix. I mean, if I was you, and I don't want to tell you how to run your business because you're the expert, I'd rather sit down with them and say, what other changes do we need to make? I know what you're saying, that you're listening to your customers, but if you look to the person right next to you or other folks, they're saying no.
We sit down with our customers on a regular basis. We sit down with them on an individual basis. We have a radio advisory council where all broadcasters are represented. Univision actually has 2 members on the radio advisory council. We have an advertising agency council where advertising agencies, including Hispanic and urban advertising agencies, are present. We do a great deal to listen to our customers, and we act on those inputs.
Anything we can help you, because if you were totally listening to your customers, we wouldn't be having this legislative hearing. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now you have 5 minutes from the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Just to piggyback on what my friend from Texas just said, with the introduction of Arbitron's PPMs, several markets have been negatively impacted by poor methodology and undeveloped technologies. even in my home district in St. Louis, long-established minority-owned radio station, KATZ-FM, fell victim to the latest string of closings. Let me ask Ms. Chagrin, Univision was able to end their contracts with Arbitron in 2 markets. Basically, why was this decision made?
When Arbitron proposed, when the Houston market was rolled out and the methodology in Houston is different, we signed a long-term contract. When Arbitron changed the methodology to the radio-only methodology, I had a lot of concerns in terms of whether or not they would be able to recruit and maintain a representative sample. Because of my background, I realized what those problems would be and encouraged Arbitron at that time to make some changes of how they recruited.
Okay, look, Ms. Chagrin, I'm going to ask for the short version,
I'm
okay?
sorry.
Because I only get 5 minutes. Now, let me ask you, on average, how much does it cost to subscribe to Arbitrons? And are these rates higher than before?
The rates are significantly higher than they were for a diary market.
Thank you so much. Mr. Skarzynski, clearly Univision's decision to decline your services and the PPM's lack of accreditation signals that your results are not accurate and negatively impact minority stations. How can you justify charging stations through exclusive and binding contracts for inaccurate information that can end their business?
Congressman, Univision did not break their contract with us. The contract was up for renewal. They did not renew. So that's the specific issue around Univision. We feel that we have a solid methodology and solid technology. We believe that we have and we've had very, very strong performance in 2009, and we think we have a representative and valid survey. And we're proud of what we do, and we are confident that we are providing the best service that we possibly can, and we are not focused at all on trying to hurt any of our customers, including Hispanic.
How do you adjust for the skewed results then of the, of the different demographics? How do we fix that?
In terms of our performance against our methodology, we are performing at a similar level, at a comparable level for African American and Hispanic listeners as we are for white listeners. Mr. Ivey showed some charts, and he showed some dips in particular in the summer. We have a problem with seasonality in the summer, but all of those levels of performance are levels that we share across the board. We don't have a different level of performance.
But now, to my understanding, you are using 66% fewer individuals on your PPM panels than when you use the diary method. You have also used your own target demographics instead of using reliable census data to accurately reflect your market. When these smaller panels are then broken down by ethnicity and other demographics, sample sizes are quite small. How can you possibly measure a station's audience accurately with such a small sample?
Well, Congressman, we do use census data. That would be just to comment on that. In terms of how Arbitron research compares to other consumer research, the Gallup poll, for example, that you're quite familiar with, has a sample size of 2,400. The J.D. Power vehicle study has a sample size of 46,000. Our current sample size for the country is on the order of 54 5,000 right now. So we feel we have a statistically significant sample size.
Okay, but how does this much smaller sample size account for unexpected results such as suburban, for instance, suburban listeners listening into an urban station and other ways in which American cultures intersect? I mean, sometimes I listen to Charlie Pride, believe it or not, or gospel.
Well, Congressman, we work with all radio broadcasters in a given market in St. Louis, so we would be encoding the stations, every station in St. Louis. We do that. We don't charge any money for a particular station. And in terms of covering the market of St. Louis, we would cover a listening area as opposed to just the city limits of St. Louis, so we would cover suburbs, and we would get a representative sample that would map to the demographics of St. Louis, based on census data, updated each year for Claritas data.
Okay, but Dr. Barry Blesser has stated that weak encoding signals can prevent the PPM from recording certain stations. What is Arbitron doing to correct technical issues with the PPM that can negatively impact smaller stations with weaker signals?
We're aware of Dr. Blessing. He did his study. He didn't contact Arbitron when he did his study. We're aware that he published his report. We have been in consultation with the MRC staff about that report and about that issue, and we don't feel that that particular comment is an accurate comment by Dr. Blessing.
Okay, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your
I want to let you know you have nothing to yield back, but anyway, the language sounds good. Yeah, I yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I missing something here, or does taking the human element out of it, the reporting element out of it, really create a problem? For instance, if I've got one of your PPM devices on, Mrs. Kaczynski, and I go into an elevator a couple times a day and I'm not listening, but I'm subject to that music, or if I go in a shopping mall into the individual stores, every time I'm walking around, I'm probably not listening to that stuff, but it's being recorded as if I'm a listener. Is that right?
That is correct, Congressman. We measure the radio that you're exposed to.
Right.
So if you're in the elevator or in a shopping center or having lunch with Congressman Clay, and you're both focused on your conversation, but you're exposed to a particular radio station, we're measuring that. Why is that important? It's important for advertisers to know how much exposure does an individual have to radio.
I guess if I were an advertiser, I want to know whether somebody's listening or not whether they're exposed to it. I mean, that's just a personal preference, I guess, but if I'm going to spend money, I want to know that somebody's not just stuck in an elevator talking to somebody else and stepping out. I want to know that they're actually listening to it. But, Mr. Ivey, are you familiar with the terms of the three settlements and litigation that resolved?
I'm familiar with the terms of the New York and New Jersey settlements.
Do those terms and the obligations to Arbitron under those settlements at all address any of the issues that you think were important for accreditation?
Well, I should let you know that both of those organizations subpoenaed our records. So they understood when they reached those settlements what our audit findings and discussions with Arbitrons were. However, I would say that both New York and New Jersey set certain performance levels for Arbitron. Particularly, I'm thinking about the compliance levels. So they needed to have, all the various demographic groups comply at certain rates with carrying the PPM. And some of those rates are lower than the MRC would desire. So the settlements reached by the attorney generals that I'm aware of, the two, New York and New Jersey, are actually not the same levels that we would seek to set, but they looked at those. They looked at our documentation when they sent those levels, I believe.
Congressman, may I make a
Grinn,
comment?
I'd like to go to Mr. Grinn first. I think she indicated she'd like to comment.
Just a point of order. They are not settlements. They are consent decrees. In each, with all of the AG discussions or lawsuits were consent decrees, which means that they could be reopened at any time.
Mr. Skarzynski, did you want to make a comment?
The settlements with the New York Attorney General and the New Jersey
The consent
Attorney
decree or
General.
the settlement?
Pardon me?
The settlement or the consent decree?
The settlement follow the metrics of the MRC and look at particular periods of time, beginning June for the New York AG, the June, October, and December of this year, and June of next year.
What was the motivating factor for you not just going to the system that you used in Houston and Riverside, San Bernardino, and just implementing that everywhere because you knew that had been approved and you were ready to roll? Was it just cost, or what's the other factor?
The system that we use in Riverside, San Bernardino, which is accredited, is the system we're using everywhere in the country.
As was the one in Houston, which is why I'm
Pardon me?
asking you, why don't you just implement those systems everywhere?
The system we use in Riverside, San Bernardino is the system we're implementing across the country. The system in Houston was developed and set up at a time when we were working in cooperation with Nielsen, whereby the same panel was going to have the audience measure television for Nielsen and radio for Arbitron. Nielsen and Arbitron, after starting that methodology in Houston, Nielsen decided that they didn't want to pursue that, and hence that's the explanation as to why we're using a radio first methodology, which it was accredited in Riverside, San Bernardino, and we're using that elsewhere in the country.
Mr. Ivey, do you agree that the Riverside, San Bernardino product is what's being brought countrywide by Arbitron? Yes. Okay. Can you explain it to me then why it's good in one place and not in others?
It's a very complex issue because we look at Arbitron's performance and their compliance with our standards, and we accredit a market, and then we don't know what happens after that. We have to rely on Arbitron to maintain that performance. So when Riverside San Bernardino was implemented, it had among the highest performance that we had ever seen. For example, the charts that I showed earlier that showed male and female carry rates or tabulation rates for the PPM, and if you remember, Atlanta was maybe 70 or something like that. At the time when we accredited Riverside, those rates were over 75, and some were over 80%. But what's happened since in Riverside is that performance has fallen way down. So Riverside looks very similar to the other markets. So the MRC is faced with a complex question. What do we do with Riverside? We've accredited Riverside. Arbitron has had that performance decline significantly, and if I could amend the record, I have a chart that actually illustrates that for you for Riverside.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that the chart be put in with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you.
So ordered.
Can you explain why San Bernardino changed?
I can't. It has to do with how Arbitron interacts with its panelists. Some of it, as Mr. Sarzinski said, might be seasonality, although the period I'm looking at for Riverside on this chart is from October, when we accredited it, to September. So when Mr. Sarzinski says he believes that in however many markets it was, 7 or 8 markets, they've earned accreditation, well, we're looking at Riverside and we're saying, okay, if we accredit, what's going to happen next month? So what we need from Arbitron is demonstration that their performance can be sustained, because it wasn't sustained in Riverside. I urge you to take a look at this chart in Riverside. So we're trying to assess what we do with Riverside. It is accredited right now. We made a decision to accredit it. It's difficult for us to remove accreditation. We're trying to figure out what to do with it. We're trying to be constructive, improve it, just like the other markets. So this is a challenging issue here, trying to get these markets to have good performance that is sustained. I urge you to look at this chart for Riverside.
Thank you.
Now, it is true that Houston has a totally different methodology in several areas, the in-person recruitment, the in-person coaching. So Houston is a different system than the other markets, but Riverside is the same.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Let me just indicate to the members that in about 5 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to have votes. And so what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is to release this panel. Well, okay, votes are now. And then we will recess for 1 hour, and then we will come back. In other words, have lunch and all of that. Let me just say before we recess, I'm very concerned. The fact that, that you're saying that you really have nobody, no supervision, no anything, and that if you decide to roll something out, you roll it out, and of course, if you ask to wait, you just roll it out anyway, and it's serious business because some of these radio stations are not going to be around, if something is not done and done very quickly. And I don't see the kind of commitment that that I would like to see. And I'm telling you, I'm one that do believe in legislation. And I want you to know that. And I'm hoping that we can work this out and come up with some kind of an agreement before we move, any further. But the point is that, if we do not, because I'm looking, you say the FCC has no role. MRC, they volunteer. That's good if they want to be invited. You invite them. If not, you tell them to go home. And I understand all that. But at the same time, I'm concerned about the fact that these minority stations, which are underrepresented right now, and that over the last 30 years we've done a little something, and now to lose that really bothers me. And I think you need to know that before we leave, we need to make certain that there's going to be some movement here that's going to make it possible for to have the kind of reporting that's going to be accurate, and to make certain that these stations are able to stay around. Because when I hear of a station that's number 1, and you change the system, it becomes number 15. I mean, I just have problems understanding that, and just from a number standpoint. So I just want to make that clear. We're going to let this panel go, and we will come back at 1:30. And of course, thanks again. But I want to let you know that I'm troubled, and we need to make certain that something is done here that brings about the kind of accuracy that's going to help in terms of these stations to be able to advertise, get business. And I understand the economic situation. Don't think I'm, but when I look at the 20% difference, I have to look at that. And also, the other question is, in terms of your bottom line versus, what it was when you had the paper diary versus what it is now. That's an issue. And I think that you might be cutting corners, and at the same time you're cutting people out. We actually will adjourn until 1:30.